Welcome to the Unlearning Room, a space to pause, get curious, and question what we've been taught. I'm your host, Mary Cat, though some of you know me as Cecily May. And today's conversation is both tender and deeply personal. We're talking about suicide, not in graphic detail, but honestly, through the lens of the nervous system and parts work and how shifting from blame to secure accountability could change the way we support people who are hurting. Before we go further, if you're in crisis right now or need support, please pause and reach out. You can call or text 988 in the US or search online for a local helpline in your country. You don't have to navigate this pain alone. Oof, I'll be honest. My intention for this episode was to offer insight into what can happen in our nervous systems around suicidal thoughts, and to share how my C.A.R.E method can help prevent crisis and guide families gently through the aftermath. But creating this one has taken a lot more bandwidth than I expected. It's almost a week late, right at the close of Suicide Awareness Month. But I'm giving myself permission to bring you something true, not perfect, to aim for 50% polished rather than 100% produced. Because this topic is too important to stay silent. What we're exploring today isn't theory for me, it's lived. The immediate aftermath of my own attempt, and the 3 to 4 years that followed, were in many ways harder than the lead up. And so much of that had to do with how blame showed up and how connection didn't. So take a breath, settle in. We're going to talk about the parts of us that reach for escape, the shame that silence breeds, and what secure accountability could have looked like for me, for my family, and for any of us loving someone through their darkest seasons. Suicide isn't selfish, it's survival. A desperate part of the nervous system saying, I can't keep living like this. But what if instead of labeling suicide as weakness or self-centered, we saw it as the tippity top of the flight response, the most extreme attempt to escape pain? What if instead of blaming the other person for the big feelings we have in response to their actions, was instead to tap into curiosity and care? As I reflected on my own story these past couple of weeks, I had to take quite a few intentional mental health pauses, as there is still so much grief and pain connected to that version of me. A lot of our felt sense of safety comes from our own internal consent. And I have carefully and intentionally sifted through my experiences from this time and am choosing to share only the parts that my system has granted permission to do so. I also want to note that in taking my time to process this prior to recording, I am sharing with you from a sturdy internal space. I also want to note that though I often allow my daughter to listen to my episodes, this one in particular, in the parts of me sharing my personal experience, does not feel quite developmentally appropriate for her. Not the topic, but my experience. So if there are any concerned parents out there, please know that she does not have access to this episode at this time. Last week, I talked about my family's blame-soaked dynamic, how constant finger-pointing created shame in me. That shame wasn't just circumstantial, it was core. I'm an adoptee, and although my parents meant to frame my adoption as love, the story I absorbed was, I'm a mistake. My religious upbringing layered on, premarital sex is a sin, so my very existence felt wrong. And every day at home confirmed that belief, especially through my mom's and my older sister's treatment of me. By high school, My nervous system was worn thin. My dad had emotionally and to a degree physically checked out in his own attempt to avoid my mother. Their marriage was turbulent, and so was the rest of our home. That same year, my older sister left for college, and my mom's focus, control, and rage zeroed in on me. She twisted stories to convince my dad I was the source of chaos, so he would dismiss my pleas for help. I was alone, isolated, and felt utterly trapped. Depression set in. I slept right after school, couldn't finish homework, my grades tanked, digestive issues flared. I was underweight, exhausted, and emotionally brittle. Weekends meant strict curfews or isolation and endless list of chores. My friends jokingly called me Cinderella. I was my parents' sounding board for marital complaints and expected to care for my younger brother. And after a double knee injury, I'd recently quit competitive swimming, my one healthy outlet. Everything inside of me screamed escape. But that year wasn't the beginning of my suicide ideations. No, my suicidal thoughts had started at the age of 8. My self-hatred and firm belief my life was a mistake took root around 5 years old. Outwardly, I was still funny and bubbly. Those parts of me worked overtime to protect me. But inside, I was hopeless. The morning of my attempt, I was newly 17 years young, and it looked ordinary from the outside. At least ordinary for my family. I procrastinated on a huge English paper. I begged my mom for time to catch up and instead got punishment and the taunt, "You'll never go to college now." In my fragile state, that meant you'll never get away from her. I'm not going to detail the attempt itself, but I will say this. I changed my mind quickly and barely got medical help in time. Honestly, I shouldn't be here. I was that close to not making it. When I awoke in the ICU, both parents were there, no warmth. My dad scolded me for being selfish. My mom smiled in a way that reminded me of the Grinch. It felt like triumph. That's when two of my strongest protector parts took over. One I call my Chandler part, yes, like from Friends, witty, funny, tension diffuser. That part said, "I've got this. I'm a funny bitch." My vulnerability shut down and was replaced with sarcasm and humor. Then my rebellious part stepped forward with vengeance. Never again will I let my mother break me. That part's mission wasn't about wanting to live. It was about refusing to let her win. These two parts kept me alive through the next 3 years of abuse and survival. The larger world didn't know how to meet me either. Friends and visitors led with, "How could you do this to me?" Or with anger, they challenged me with, "You don't seem like someone who almost died." Survival, showing up with humor or numbness didn't match their idea of suicidal enough. Whatever the hell that is supposed to look like. Some decided I was just attention-seeking. Others scolded me for scaring them. But alone at night in the hospital, I let myself cry and wondered if living was a mistake. When I was medically stable again, my therapist and parents decided I should go to a psychiatric hospital. My mom smiled again, that same wicked Grinch-like smile. My dad stayed cold. My therapist later told me she'd hoped it might give me space away from my mom's cruelty, a small, protective act in an otherwise unsafe system. Unbeknownst to her, she was sending me into more harm. The male doctor there exploited my vulnerability and abused power. My mother's one soft point in advocating for me was sexual exploitation with an abuse of power. I was released from that hospital after a week's time, But just as quickly as she had come to rescue me, she turned cold again when my dad, her, and myself had our final mandatory therapy meeting before I was allowed to go home. There in the meeting, my mother handed me a brochure for troubled teens and said that if living with her and my dad was such a horrible experience, then they both agreed that I would be better off at this home. What followed at home was relentless. My parents and older sister mocked me, calling me crazy, taunting me, "Are you going to commit suicide again?" or waving a phone and threatening to call 911 whenever I cried or had a meltdown. Friends weaponized my attempt. One close friend gave me a long letter listing all the ways I was selfish and a bad friend. Another blackmailed me for a year, keeping me compliant in our friend group by threatening to tell everyone the truth. You see, somehow the real reason for my disappearance, the ICU and the psych stay, stayed quiet in my hometown that usually thrived on gossip and everyone else's business. People believed I'd just been out for knee surgery. That secrecy felt like relief and privacy, but also fed my shame. If those closest to me couldn't hold compassion, why risk telling anyone else? Blame was everywhere. I was the problem and the solution. No one paused to ask, what happened here? What led this kid to such despair? What support does she need now? Or if they did, they came with Bibles, convinced my healing would be found in there, dismissing the very obvious reality of my home life. Looking back with the language and tools I have now, I can see how blame culture saturated everything around my attempt in its aftermath. My family didn't pause with curiosity. They doubled down on control and deflection. Instead of asking what pain had brought me to that edge, the response was, "You're selfish, crazy, manipulative." Friends, many of them kids themselves, followed the models they'd seen. "How could you do this to me? You're just seeking attention." Shame was passed like a hot potato. Instead of having sturdy adults in our community helping my friends process their fear and confusion, they too were left alone to navigate complex, terrifying feelings. This is the impact blame has on people and communities. It leaves us alone and confused and desperate to understand the whys. So instead, we create stories about others. This is a good place to walk through the BLAME acronym again in the context of my experience. Again, that is B.L.A.M.E. Blame, it showed up as shifting all responsibility onto me as if my despair existed in a vacuum. Leverage was using guilt, like, "How could you do this to us?" or threats such as phones waved or 911 taunts to further prove they were right and I was wrong. Assuming was in others assigning my motives without asking, or if they did ask, they already had an answer decided, and no matter what I said, it wasn't acceptable. Misalignment was in equating my humor or shutdown with proof I didn't really mean it, the final consensus being that I was troubled and seeking attention. Exhausted was from draining safety and connection until survival was all I had left, distracting me and others from healing. The cost of this was enormous. It reinforced my core wound, "I'm a mistake." It taught my nervous system that vulnerability is dangerous and that others' perceptions trumped my truth. But here's what could have changed things. Even small doses of secure accountability. Someone, a parent, a friend, an adult saying, "I'm scared and confused, but I want to understand what led you here." Or, "I know I've missed things, and I want to own my part." That's not about excusing. It's about responsibility with humanity and finding sturdiness within to hold space for someone who has fallen down and is struggling to get back up. Except that wasn't really my experience as a teen. I do want to note that I had one adult in my corner, a friend's mom, whom when she visited me in hospital, all she said was, "I love you, Shug," and gave me a hug. She has continued with that steady energy even to this day, and I'll forever be thankful for that. But at home, it was a different story, and instead, I accepted and believed that everyone's anger and actions toward me were my fault. I was a mistake after all. Over the years, I've reflected on how my behavior did impact those around me. Though we are all responsible for our feelings and ability to process them, we also act as catalysts in relationship. So of course my attempt impacted those around me. I've addressed, apologized, and taken responsibility for my actions at that time, without taking blame for others' behaviors in response. I'm still healing the part of me that holds the heaviness of those experiences close to her heart. And though no one from that time period has acknowledged their actions or how their behaviors impacted me, part of my own healing is recognizing this and holding multiple truths at once. Yes, it would be nice to hear others take ownership and stop blaming me for their behaviors. And my system as a whole now trusts that the path toward genuine growth and healing is by offering care inwardly. Because here's a nuance that is true and hard to hear. Our traumas and wounds often come from relationship. And while healing can also happen in relationship, it's not the only path and often not the most common one. Our healing depends on our ability and courage to walk that journey inside ourselves. And this is where the C.A.R.E method matters. These 4 skills could have been life-giving for me as a teenager, but instead they've been life-giving to me as an adult. With curiosity, instead of assuming attention-seeking, someone could have paused and asked, what's happening under the surface? What pain led her here? And then offered that same curiosity towards themselves in response to my answer. Because there is not a comfortable answer in response to suicide. And what I found to be true with my humor part, people don't want a pleasant answer either because it's incongruent to the act of suicide. Accountability could have looked like my parents reflecting on their roles, not to take all blame and shame themselves, but to own the impact of emotional neglect, abuse, and chaos. Accountability on a macro level could have also looked like my extended family who knew what was going on but decided to respect my parents' privacy, coming together and approaching my parents in support of my healing. Or our community and my friends' parents not gossiping about me or hyperfixating on the ways my struggles were externalizing, like my low weight, all of which were ways for them to escape the reality of how hard life was at home for me. A reality that was not a secret in our community, but one that was avoided. Instead, my mom's abuse was brushed off as, she's dysfunctional, but she loves you. I was left to navigate those hardships on my own as a child. Repair in the C.A.R.E method can be simple but profound. Apologies for harm with changed behaviors in the future. Naming missed care. Taking action to restore safety, adults seeking guidance and support of their own to better understand how to show up for their kids. Empowerment would have looked like helping me feel that surviving wasn't failure but strength, and that I wasn't permanently broken. Or for my family, empowerment would have been the result of my parents stepping into the leadership role our family desperately needed, and learning from this painful experience and allowing these lessons to lead them towards growth and humility, which would have strengthened not only my relationship with them, but our family as a whole. Even a small shift, 30% curiosity and accountability, could have broken the isolation that followed. Instead of compounding shame, there might have been a path toward healing together. Let's take a breath together. and shift to what unlearning here means. It's loosening the belief that blame is safety and being the problem is the only role available to us. For so long, I equated survival with taking on all responsibility, as if swallowing everyone's pain could make me safe. But that's a lie shame tells. And another lie we need to unlearn as a society is that suicide is selfish. It's not. The dictionary defines selfish as of a person, action, or motive, lacking consideration for others, concerned chiefly with one's own personal profit or pleasure. That last part is key. There is no profit or pleasure in wanting to end your life. Yes, it might appear to be a lack of consideration for others, but here's the truth. People who become suicidal are often considering others deeply, just through the distorted lens of survival. When your system is drowning in despair, you start to believe that being alive is a burden to the people closest to you, and that not being alive is the most considerate, protective thing you could do for them. That's not cruelty, it's hopelessness. It's equally important to name what's happening inside the nervous system. Suicide isn't part of the fight response, it's part of the flight response, the very far end of it. In IFS language, suicide is often the biggest protector on the flight chain. It's the nervous system's last-ditch effort to escape unbearable pain when fight has long been lost. Think of the range of flight. It can look like scrolling on your phone in dissociation, shutting down to avoid conflict, a teenager running away, someone avoiding hard conversations. Suicide is the same protective impulse, just with devastating, irreversible stakes. It's complete surrender laced with despair, not aggression. When we understand that, we can also see why blame is so damaging and why something like the C.A.R.E method matters. Curiosity, accountability, repair, and empowerment are the antidotes to the isolation shame builds. They don't require perfect parents, perfect friends, or a perfect system, just small, intentional moments of understanding and shared humanity. When we really understand that suicide lives in the flight response, that blame keeps people alone, and that even small curiosity can disrupt shame, something starts to shift. It doesn't mean everything gets tied up neatly or that the harm or discomfort goes away, but it does open a door to something softer, more humane. And that's the heart of this unlearning, the things I wish I could have whispered to my younger self, and maybe what you need to hear today too. Blame isolates, curiosity connects. Taking ownership isn't the same as taking everyone else's blame. Suicide isn't selfish. It's survival distorted by hopelessness. And healing doesn't have to wait for others to repair. It can begin with how we show up for ourselves. If this feels too heavy or you're unsure how to shift some of these ideals, that's okay. We can start by offering care inwardly, like curiosity about the parts of us that learned, I'm a mistake. Accepting accountability where our pain did spill over onto others without swallowing what isn't ours. Repairing by tending to our own safety and worth by showing up for the wounds within us with the unconditional acceptance or support that wasn't offered to us when we were younger. And empowerment by naming that surviving is strength, not failure. If safe people come along and join the healing, beautiful. But your healing does not depend on them. It can begin inside of you today. Let's pause for a moment. Take another breath and get curious. Have you ever defaulted to blame towards someone struggling or towards yourself? What might curiosity or compassion have looked like and felt like instead? Our individual relationships with blame and accountability are personal, and yet they impact the foundation of our families and pump out into the ecosystem of our society. When we look at the health of our society as at a macro level, we can see that it's pretty disconnected and lacks harmony and balance. To repair, we need to retire blame and build care systems in families, workplaces, schools. Punishment and shame don't keep people alive or allow them to grow and thrive, but connection does. The blame and care frameworks aren't just personal tools, they're cultural correctives. Even small doses of curiosity and accountability can break isolation and invite healing. Here are a couple of reframes to keep in your pocket if you're open to them. No pressure. Suicide is an extreme nervous system response, not selfishness. And blame fuels stigma. Curiosity opens the door to deeper understanding and healing. Let's take a breath. Suicide, blame, and shame are no easy feat to sit with. They are bound to bring up feelings or activation within each of us. Thank you for sitting with me in this hard but necessary conversation. I know this isn't light, but it's vital. And if this brought things up for you, please honor your own nervous system. Reach out for support if you need it. In the US, you can call or text 988. And just a quick programming note, because this episode came late and took extra emotional space to hold, there won't be an episode this coming Thursday. But I'll be back with a new one on the following Thursday, October 9th. Until then, thanks for being in the Unlearning Room. If something stirred in you today, titrate it slowly or bring it into safe conversation. That's where unlearning begins. New episodes drop weekly-ish on Thursdays. Find me on Instagram at the Unlearning Room Podcast or visit cecilymay.com, where you can also find my blame and care resources. Until next time, stay curious and stay kind to the parts of you still learning.